hit record. So I'm recording this. So how's it going? Like, how's the project going? Any thumbs up at all? No? Okay. Like hesitant thumbs up. How many of you are having trouble getting Unreal to function with all of the animations? Like you've not been able to get everything into Unreal working yet. Right? I'm going to assume that means that, okay. So I want to spend some time working with you on that. I will say that there's a couple of issues that you may be running into. I kind of showed you a little bit of that earlier with the fixing the punch animation issue, where when you punch, it turns off your game blueprint, and so you have to turn it back on. So some people may be having issues there. I've done this quite a bit though, so if you're still having issues with anything, let me know. Just out of curiosity, Lana, what's yours doing? It's what now? I just showed it. Oh, okay. Is it not giving you the icon? Oh, that one. Okay. Yeah, it's just figured into the 452. That's right. It's better. Is there more slow? Like it's a little less slow? Oh. So there's a couple of things that that can break on this, and I kind of know what some of them are. Some of you maybe are having issues with your character coming in backwards or sideways or really small. That's a unit conversion issue. So there's a lot of different little things that could be causing problems with this. And so I'd like to have some time in class today to just help you out, because I'd really like you to have everything functioning by the end of the day. So just to show you, I'm going to go ahead and pull mine up, not because I'm going to use it, but it's because of something I'm going to do here in a bit. One of the things I'm not prepared to show you just yet is how to get that physics reaction when your character punches or kicks. I need to do just a touch more research before I do a lecture on that, because I feel like I would flub it a little bit right now, and I don't want to make this more confusing than necessary. So before we jump into all of this, I do want to chat with you just for a second about grades. Some of you probably saw some of them coming in over the last couple of days. I have gotten the exercises and the discussions graded, and I'm currently grading project 1. How I'm doing that is I'm recording you a feedback video using your sync sketch link or your video file that you've put up there. And so I'll probably have at least 2 videos per class. And I'll email those out to you, and I'll paste them into the rubric, so you'll have links to those. Those will just be YouTube videos. Strongly encourage you to watch all of them, even if it's not your video, because some stuff I sort of make little mini lessons out of them. Like if somebody's having an issue, I will open up Maya and show them how to work on that, right? And so these are little freebie lessons, extra tutorial stuff in there. But the other thing it is ways of me explaining to you how to improve yours. And that video is sort of what your grade will be based off of, right? My feedback there should be the notes for why you are getting the grade you're getting. So it gets a little more confusing for everybody who is repeating the class for credit, right? So if you're in this as Animation 2 or Animation 3, probably should kind of pay attention to this part. ESRP, early semester progress reports are due, I think, the 25th. So I'm trying to get my grades done so I can submit those for you and you can have something meaningful. However, a portion of you are doing a project that takes more than one project grade, right? Like it's taking up 2 projects. And so that means if I were to give you a grade right now, the grade would kind of have to be incomplete. And I don't want that screwing up anything for you for the early semester progress report. So, so if your project is just a individual project, you're like, I just did it for a single project, and it's finished, I'll give you a regular grade on that, and that'll be what shows up in the early semester progress report. Everybody going through the class as character animation 1, yours will be a regular grade in that, an A, B, C, D, F, whatever. If you're going through it the second time and you're, I don't want it to mess up your grade just because your first project really isn't finished yet, right? So how we're going to do that is if you are doing 2 projects, or if you're doing a project that takes up 2 project grades, I'm going to wait until you're done with that to give you a grade for project 1 and 2. The more I started thinking about that, like if I gave you a grade for the blocking pass, how is that revisable, right? Like your revision of that would really just be that you finished the animation, which means that grade 1 and grade 2 would be the same grade. So I think that that's probably how it's going to work, is that we'll break it up a little bit differently. If you did something that takes up 2 projects because of complexity, then whatever you got for grade for project 2 will be the same grade you get on project 1, right? So if you get a 75 on 2, you get a 75 on 1 as well. And if you revise that project, both of those grades can be raised, right? If you're doing it in a way that there are 2 elements of it, like some people are doing 2 characters in a shot, probably what we'll do is project 1 is 1 character, project 2 is the other character. I'll kind of work with you each to adjust that. But what that means is that when early semester progress reports are due, you're not going to have any meaningful grades in D2L yet, right? Because this first project takes up 2 projects. So what I'm going to put in there for you is there's an option to put in either a pass or a fail grade. I will put in one of those grades as an indicator of you're on track or you're not on track, right? Really, it's like if you didn't turn something in, it's probably why you would get the F. But passing means, yeah, I see you're working toward it. Just keep up that momentum. Because I don't want to put in like a C or something that doesn't actually make sense, right? If you missed an exercise, then that means your grade right now is like a 20. And I don't want you to get like an angry financial aid letter or something because we haven't gotten enough grades to make that grade mean something. Does that make sense? Okay. Everybody else, your grades are going to be sort of normal. Basically, whatever's in D2L, I'll just plug that into the ASRP. My plan is I've gotten through about half to 3/4 of the first class. My plan is to come in tomorrow morning, burn to the rest of them while digital media students sleep, and have those grades in hopefully relatively early. Stuff gets in the way, but my plan is to be done by Friday. And so you should have all those grades in there. If you have a revision you're wanting to submit, drop that in there soon. Like if you can beat me to the office by tomorrow morning by putting something in that folder, I'll look in the revisions folder when I'm grading it, and I'll give you feedback and your grade based off of what's in there, right? All right. Does that make sense? Questions, comments? All right. So I wanted to look really quickly at what I have in here, how it's working. Hopefully you have something similar that if I hit this play button, have my character, and these terrible, terrible animations, right? They're so terrible. Also, if she jumps outside of this box, basically the game ends. Like, there we go. Now I hit escape. I forgot that I changed those settings. So we're going to start working on these in class one animation at a time. And I'm going to focus today on what seems like probably the least glamorous of all of these animations, which is your idle animation. And the reason for that is even though it's the least glamorous, in terms of gameplay, it's one of the more important ones. If you think about it, like we've just sat here and stared at my character's idle for multiple minutes, right? And if it looks like crap, then it looks like crap, right? Like people will associate this with the character. If you take any character, you can usually tell something about their personality from their idle pose, right? And so you'll remember back in animation fundamentals, where we had to practice doing poses. This is actually the process that you would usually go through in a work environment as well. When you get a character, the first thing you do is establish your idle pose. I mean, after we get these animations plugged in here. And so I'm going to establish an idle pose and use that idle pose to create an idle animation. Now, one of the reasons I start this one off first is because this is one of the only animations in this entire class that I will ever tell you to do this in a non-pose-to-pose manner, right? Every animation, almost every other animation I can think of, particularly for this class, just works better if you're working pose-to-pose. I'm not going to work pose-to-pose in this because, frankly, your idle is just one pose, right? Your whole idle animation is your character staying in one pose and trying to seem like they're not dead, right? And so I'm going to show you a way of editing this that actually, hopefully, will get you a little more comfortable and fluent in the graph editor. So I'll go ahead and hit escape. I'll go ahead and open up my character in Maya. And the first thing I'm going to do is open up my game exporter and find my idle animation. There we go. So my idle animation for this character is frames 125 to 250. So it's about 125 frames, right? And right now it looks like this, which is absolutely terrible. Like if I were to ask somebody what is her personality right now, there is none, right? But if anybody play God of War, the new God of War? I haven't, but everybody in Game Informer apparently really loved it. I was reading Game Informer's like top 50, and everybody's like, God of War is amazing. But like, you know those characters' personalities. Like if you were to pause on any frame, you know like kind of what's in their head by the way they're standing, right? That neutral pose should tell you something about them. The same with Spider-Man or any of the other games that were incredible this year, or any other year. So your idle pose should carry some of that character's weight. And so I'm going to go ahead and establish that. Again, like how I usually do this, how most people do this, is as soon as you get the character, you don't start animating anything, like your art director sends it to you. I establish a couple of idle poses and say, what do you think? And so my first thing that I ever send them is a couple of images and trying to establish what these poses are. So this is not something you're like, put the arms down, I'm done. Like this is something that sometimes takes a whole day of crafting this pose because like it's the thing that you will see most, and it's usually the starting and ending pose for all of your other animations. So I'm going to establish some personality for her. And just like we did with BenBot, we're just going to pick a word, right? Like you want her to be angry? Do you want her to be bored? Do you want her to be confident? Do you want her to be cocky? Do you want her to be, like, what is it you want from her on this? And we're going to use that contrapposto line of action and silhouette to craft a strong pose for this. So the other thing you need to remember is that every other animation transitions in and out of this one, right? If you remember, our run animation is our character, it starts with our character in the passing pose, which is really close to our idle pose. It's just the character on one leg instead of two, right? And so if I made my idle pose something way off target, right? Like if my idle pose is my character like this or something like that, then like every time it transitions, it has to go from this pose into whatever it's going to do and then back into this pose. And it's very clunky, right? I've seen some people who have problems with that because they want to do confident by putting the hands on the hips, right? And that means every time your character starts to run, they have to take off their hands off their hips and then come back to them, right? And so try to think about that. Like, what is something that's going to get your character in and out of that idle pose smoothly? But at the same time, feel alert and ready to go. So I'm on 125. I'm just going to start posing it. This just drives me crazy, like when the feet are perfect like that. So that's always one of the first things I do is just mess those up a little bit. Maybe a little something like that, just a little bit. Maybe push them together a touch more. I'm going to shift her weight over this leg, maybe angle her just a little bit like this. So getting a little extra contrapposto might end up making her feel a little bit, like right now she's kind of leaning forward, so she's feeling concerned. So I'll kind of lean her back just a touch. And so we can actually keep pushing this to get whatever personality you're kind of going for. So let's go ahead and shift her over there. I want to give her a lot of this leaning here. So I'm just kind of messing with it right now. It's a little too much maybe. That feels confused. There we go. So let's try that. Now keep in mind, most of the time you're going to be looking at her from this angle. So even though it might look good from the front, it's not looking the best from the back. I think I pushed it just a little bit too much for the way the spine is set up. Maybe something like that. For me, the clavicles, these controls here, if you recognize that when those go up, your character feels more tense. When they go down, she feels more relaxed. So if I'm going for relaxed, I'll take them down just a little bit, maybe pull them forward just a touch. And I'll go ahead and start getting her into a pose. So again, it has to feel like something that she could maintain through this whole animation. The other thing I like to do, like, keep in mind that there are certain poses that are going to feel more or less feminine or masculine, I guess, right? And so it's very easy, like if you think of like the cow, I don't even really like using that phrase that way because it's not necessarily accurate. But if you think of like the old cowboy movies or whatever, like when they're like they point their elbows out and they try to make themselves very wide and broad, right? Like for her, if I'm wanting her to feel a little bit more like less abrasive than that, then I'm going to tuck her elbows in just a little bit, right? That feels a little bit more like she's in control of her arms and she's being more precise with her hands. And like for right or for wrong, that kind of leans toward a touch more feminine than masculine. Like I feel like I'm not ever in control of my arms; they just flop around beside me and like. So I'm going to try to get something that feels a little bit like, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. The difference between this versus this just feels a little bit different, right? Like, and you can use little bitty subtleties like that to control it. Now, I don't want to twin too much. I don't want one side of the body doing exactly the same thing as the other. So I'm going to try to, I think I'll take this arm and keep it curled up just a touch more. I feel like that's looking a little weird there. There you go. And then this arm, I'm going to let it kind of hang loose just a little bit more. So much. Now, if I haven't already harped on this enough, please, please, please pose your hands. Like this is, like a hand can kill a pose, and a hand can like totally make the pose read. An example of this is like right now I want her hands to feel kind of loose and relaxed. And so I can change this entire pose just with the hand. If I grab this hand, I kind of go to these middle joint, end joint to get some curl in there. I'm going to push these fingers together just a little bit. And then using all of these, I will bend it forward and curl it a little bit. Like this is starting to feel just a little bit more relaxed, right? Like my character is feeling a little more like loose, right? And if we look at that whole pose, maybe that feels that way. Maybe it just feels a little more relaxed. Versus if I go in here and just change a couple of small things on the hand, I can pull this back and curl these fingers forward, and now she feels angry, right? Like just that hand, like that tension in the hand can completely change the entire pose. So like, I think I was going to do the hands later excuse is like one of the weakest excuses you can ever use. Because like the hands are actually part of the pose, right? So take some time, put them in here now, because you'll have hundreds of frames that you have to fix later if you don't. So I want to go ahead and kind of pose her hand here, loosen that up, go over to this other side, loosen it up over here as well. And again, in a production pipeline, this may just be one of 3 or 4 different poses that I would send to the animation lead and get approval. And I think it's like, let me go and get this finished. I think it's important to recognize that not getting it right at this stage means a lot of work for you later. If the art director comes back and tells you after you've been animating on this for a week, if the art director comes back and tells you you have to change your idle pose, like that's a lot of information you have to change, right? It's the starting pose for every one of your animations. You have to change it on your idle and adapt all of your animations to that. So this is good time investment here. You're investing into making this this base for your animation look good. So I'll go ahead and stop there. I kind of like that. I'm going to select all my controls and hit S on frame 125. And then I'm going to middle click, drag out here to the end of my animation and hit S. And then these other 2 keyframes I put in here, like they're just garbage keyframes. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. So what I should have now is my character pretty much just staying on those 2 keyframes, right? So when I said we weren't going to use that old animation, we're not. I pretty much undid everything I had as my original idle. Now I'm just going to make this entire animation better. So you'll remember a couple of elements from Animation Fundamentals. The graph editor arrow, y'all remember that? All right, so that's what I'm actually going to do now. A lot of animations, most animations, I say animate in a pose-to-pose manner. But we only have one pose. It's this idle pose, right? She just has to feel like she's still alive in that idle pose. So to try to craft another pose means your character is going to start feeling like they're like going to these like variations of your idle pose, and then it's just going to feel like a bad dance, right? What we really need is like this pose that kind of moves a little bit, sways a little bit, right? And so how I'm going to do this is I am actually done with my blocking and my blocking plus of this. It was one pose. I'm just going to go in there now and generate some curves that have some motion in them, right? So if I hit stop here, go grab my root control, I'm going to go to my animation layer, translate X. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to select everything and make sure that everything is set to weighted tangents. So I go curves, weighted tangents. And then I'm going to go ahead and set these to auto for right now. And then again, grab the hips, and I'm just going to go through these one at a time. I already set up my shortcut keys, but you'll remember that add key tool, I wired that to T for me. And so now I can just grab this and start drawing me sort of a noise curve, right? Just a little bit of a sway or a shift, right? So hit T, and I'm just going to start drawing some of this in here, right? Maybe like that. Just add some of this. Add some variety in here. Set that to straight. Okay, and if I hit play on this, you can see that all I get now is this like little subtle shift from side to side. Now, you probably remember this, that if I go to these keys and I select them and hit W, I can move them around wherever I want to, right? But if I hit R, I can scale them, right? If I hold down R, I middle click in the center of my timeline, I can make these bigger or smaller. And so I can start making this curve bigger or smaller on how my character idles, right? Obviously that's a little too big to me, but I've just drawn some curves and now I can just push and pull those to make them more, read more or less clearly. I will say that I would go somewhat small on this to begin with, because these are going to start compounding over time. This like side to side sway, once we get some rotation in there, once we get some rotation on the spine, like this is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually your character is going to be moving too much, and you'll have to go down there or go through all of it and sort of scale it back down. But sometimes I just go ahead and animate it a little too big, that way I can see it more clearly, and then just scale it down. So I'm just going to go through each of my curves and continue to do this. Now my translate Y is my up and down curve, and so I can actually do this while it's playing. Sometimes it'll crash, so you have to be careful, but you can just go through here and start adding some up and down to it. And so now you see that I'm getting this as the animation. Yeah, that looks perfect. Not really. So my up and down animation, usually there isn't very much of it, right? I'm going to scale this down pretty significantly to where she's probably not going to be doing too much, if any, up and down translates on this. The one place where I would put up and down translates are like if your character is doing a lot of weight shifts from leg to leg, then maybe you would put that up and down somewhere in there. Maybe they dip through the center and go up onto the other leg, or maybe they go higher if you're, you know, whatever. Like that would be a place to get some transition. Okay. Let's let's talk just for a second about workflow process, right? How you are working on this. So one of the when we first started doing this, I had you put all of the animations in one file, right? I usually work that way, but that's because I actually am pretty good at visualizing the way the end of my animation flows back into the beginning of my animation. So let me just kind of show you this as an example on this up and down curve, right? If I'm looking at what's happening here at the end of my animation, right? This value is transitioning downward, right? At the beginning of my animation, the value is transitioning downward. Bless you. However, if you look here at the very ending of that, that flattens out, right? And so what we would really get there if it were flattening out would be a hesitation in that downward momentum, right? So the way this would actually flow together more clearly is if I were to break these tangents and do something like this. And so you can see that as our value is transitioning downward here, when it goes back to the beginning, it's going to continue transitioning downward. Right? Now, like I said, I feel like I'm pretty good at visualizing that in my head. You may not feel comfortable with that, and there's actually a tool inside of Maya that makes this easier. However, it only works if you're doing one animation per file. So the reason I put them all in here to begin with is because of last class period when we exported out all of our animations and brought all of our animations into Unreal. Otherwise, what we would have had was 4 Maya files, and we would have had to do 4 exports and then bring them in 4 different times, right? If you are at this point, you can always start breaking these files up here. If you want to break this up into just an idle file by itself, you're welcome to. And there is some benefit to doing that. And I'm going to show you that. Really, there's only a benefit to it on your idle and your run. Right? So I'm going to show you kind of briefly here how to do that, or what that benefit is, which is all of these curves out here to the beginning and end of this are out here, right? And if I just deleted those, let's say I deleted all those frames, right? I want to go ahead and extend my timeline out further so you can see in both directions. Now this is my animation, right? And we know that on this value, everything before this keyframe is just going to be that same value because there's no other keyframes before it, right? So that value is negative 0.657. It's going to be negative 6.57 all the way, negative 0.657, all the way back to negative forever, right? And then this value here, still the same. It's going to continue on flat this way. We can visualize what happens in infinity in both directions just by going up to curves and turning on, going up to view and turning on infinity. And so what you'll see is we get these flat lines that go on forever, right? That value stays flat before and after this curve change we have. Well, we can change that option in Maya. Instead of staying flat or constant forever, if I go to curves and change post-infinity to cycle, my curve continues forever, right? And if I zoom out, it literally cycles out through here forever, right? And I can do the same thing with curves pre-infinity cycle, right? Now, when you have it like this, it's a little easier to see how that transition happens, right? Because if I go in here to the end of this, you can see that there's this little flat spot in that transition. And if I smooth it out there, and I smooth it out here, then that just flows smoothly from one into the other, right? Now, again, for me, I have worked with this long enough to where I don't really feel like I have to have that visualization to get that smooth transition. And so I usually keep all of my files in one Maya file, and it just makes it faster for me to export. For you, you may want to consider breaking out your idle and your run into their own Maya files so you can use this infinity trick. Without it, if this is not flowing from one to the other, you'll get a little pop at the end, or a little hitch at the end and beginning of every animation when it loops, right? So, so I'm going to pretend that I'm not doing it this way. Or actually, I'm just going to not do it this way. And then I can still just go in here and visualize what that should look like in my head, right? So whichever of those works best for you, the important part is that you're not getting that hitch, right? So again, I'm going to continue to just draw more curves, translate Z, grab this, T to insert them. This is my forward and backward motion. So I'll get in here and look at it from this angle. I feel like that's way too much already. Let's get a little bit here, zoom in, T. She's probably not going to have very much of this, right? Just something like that. What's that do? Okay. So I still have quite a bit of this side-to-side movement in Translate X. And so for this next part, I'm actually going to make it bigger just so I can see it more clearly, right? I want to do more of this side-to-side motion just so I can see what her x-axis is doing from side to side. Because right now, there's no rotation at all on her torso. She's just sort of staying in the same orientation and just sort of sliding it from side to side. And that's not really how that would work. You would have lots of rotation in this. And so I'm going to start with rotate Z. And the reason for that is because rotate Z is my side-to-side rotation, right? So if I go to rotate Z, I'm going to think about this in the same way I thought about the pendulum, right? As her hips move to this side and reach this end point, maybe I'll overshoot at that end point just a little bit, right? So I can go in here, hit T, sort of shoot past that. But in the transition to that, maybe I will drag in the other direction. Right, so now that motion is going to drag her hips, and then they're going to overshoot at the end. Right? Now again, I'm making these way bigger than they necessarily need to be, just so, let's see, so they drag back this way, and then they're going to overshoot here. So let's try something like that and see what that looks like. So you're seeing what I'm getting there in that sort of that pendulum way. And it's way exaggerated, but that's fine because I can go in here now and just scale that back down. And now I have the right motion. I maybe just have a little bit too much of it, right? So, R, scale that back down. And there we go. So I'm going to want to put some rotate X, that's the forward and backward rotation as well. So T, I'm not really sure how much I want. Feels like maybe that's backwards. Let's try something like that, that. And again, I want to fix these tangents. And with the Y, this is going to be a little bit of a twist. And so I want to be kind of careful with this because I don't want to get too carried away. Again, I'll probably just do a little bit of something like this. Let it kind of hover here. Let it kind of overshoot. Do something like that. W. Flow out of that one, flow into this one. Okay. So let's say something like this. So you're starting to see what we're getting is just this really subtle motion, right? But all of this so far is just on her hips, right? Just on that root control. What I need to do now is do this same polish pass, do the same splining pass up her spine to her head and then down her arms, right? So get all of that loose, right? I'm reluctant to show you this just because I am working it in this one file, and I think that people think it's a shortcut, but sometimes it actually breaks more things than it fixes. But I'll show you. If you're working inside of a Let's say you're working inside of a Maya file where there are no other animations in that file. It's just this idle animation. Just to show you how that would work, I'll go ahead and delete all those other keyframes in here, right? Delete these. Delete these. Oh. Apparently I didn't need to delete all of those. I think I just need to delete this keyframe. And then I need to delete these keyframes. There we go. So now 125. Right. So if this is what we have, there's a little bit of a shortcut we can try, and it doesn't always work exactly correctly. But let's watch. If I go to control my rotate, let's use my rotate Z as an example, right? That's that side-to-side rotation. Well, I need some rotation on this control too. So one of the ways you can do that is select this, and then click on my rotate Z on both of them. And now while I have both of these visible, I can go in here and start redrawing a similar curve, right? And so that's nice because I have this like sort of template to go by, and I can get something kind of close, or maybe even almost exactly the same, right? And so this is probably the method I would recommend you trying, just because it's a little bit more controlled, and you're getting more practice on this, right? And now you can see that her spine, this middle spine control, is got that same rotation on it, right? Or scale that up so you can see it a little bit better. Right, so it's got that same rotation on it. It's a little too much, right? But one of the cool parts about this is after you've done that, I can hit W and just shift these one frame later. And now I have a little bit of offset in there too, right? A little bit of drag. And I can scale that back down to something reasonable, and this is going to start feeling a little more natural. Right? Now, one of the tricks you can, I still feel like she's moving too much. More than likely what happens is after I get all these curves in there, I do another pass where I sort of balance it and make it look correct. Also recognize this has something to do with how far away you're viewing your character. If your character is really small, your idles need to be more exaggerated. If it's really big, then maybe you're going to feel these tiny shifts a little too much. So you have to scale that appropriately. So here's the trick that can sometimes mess up for you though. Because you may already realize that I can actually copy keyframes and paste keyframes, right? So like my rotate X, I can select all of these in my graph editor, and I can hit Control C to copy them and paste them in another channel. Even if it's not another rotate X channel, I could copy this curve into my squash and stretch channel, right? The problem with that is, in this case, it will work because there's nothing before or after it. In other cases, it doesn't work because it will push the animation later, right? So that's why I had to break these out into its own animation. But I can show you some of the errors that can happen. So if I select this, I have to hit Control C immediately after I've selected it. Like if I go up here and click something or tumble around, and I hit Control C, it's going to copy my rig, not this curve, okay? So in the graph editor, select it, and before doing anything else, Control C. Then I go to my curve here, I'll go to my rotate X. I don't really need this key out here, so I'll delete it. I'll go to this one key that's remaining, and I can hit Control V here, and it'll paste my curve, but you'll see that it pasted over my first keyframe. It shifted my curve down. See? So to fix this, I have to go to Edit, Paste, and make sure that I have this set to Insert and Connect. And then when I paste those keys, it's just going to paste them right in there, right? And so now I have that same curve on my upper body as well, right? So the cool thing about this, though, is if I wanted to paste this in my translate, I can. I don't actually think I'm going to get a great result from this, but now I have that data in there on translate as well. So you can copy and paste keyframes in the graph editor and reuse parts of those. It takes a lot of practice to not mess it up. And it kind of takes a certain situation in your Maya file to not mess it up. So feel free to play with that. This is not a shortcut though. Like, this is not the easy way to do it, because really I would still go in there and look at every curve. This is just a quick way of getting some data on that curve, right? I'm still going to need to scale it up. This is not an automatic way of getting an idle. Okay, so again, we're going to go through all of these channels, put curves on everything until our character is feeling very loose and flowy. The reason we do this, not the reason. After we've done this, I can increment and save, right? And here's where all of that work from last class period pays off. Is because now all I have to do is in my game editor, uncheck everything, check my idle, export. Do I want to replace them? Yes, I do. And in Unreal, I can go to my CF character animation. I can right-click on this idle and just say re-import. And since I exported it over top of that old file, it's just going to re-import the same file again with the new idle. Now, if you exported it to a different location or something, you would say re-import with new source. But I'll just say re-import. It's going to re-import it. And now when I hit play, I have my new idle in there. Okay? So like just a few clicks, and I'm seeing my animations updating in the game. Okay? This is how you should be working. Like at any point you're working on these game characters, you should have both Unreal and Maya open at the same time. And every couple of minutes, every 30 minutes, whatever, export it out and look at it in game, because that's where it's actually going to end up. And it needs to look good there above all else, right? So, so is this making sense? All right. I think I went on a little longer than I meant to. I thought that I could get this in 30 minutes. Turns out it took me 47 minutes and 30 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of wrap this up, and the rest of the class period will be yours. Next class period, we are going to work on the run cycle and get a pretty solid run. The punch animation we'll be doing as a whole day as well. And actually, next class period, we may also be doing exercise 2. I think I may have had exercise 2 on the schedule for today, but I had a meeting before my first class, so I didn't want to cut it tight, so I'll postpone that. Exercise 2 is very closely related to what I went over today, so hopefully that'll make sense for you. Any questions about any of this? Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on this video. The rest of the class is yours, but if your Unreal project is currently not working, please wave me down so I can help you get that fixed, because you don't need to be fighting with that for the next week. I want you focusing on the animation part. So let me help you get that going. Otherwise, the class is yours.